would take us into outer space, first around the Earth, and then to the moon. As part of this, what was assembled in Hampton, Virginia, at the NASA facilities there, was a team, and actually nationally, the team was over 1,000 people, most of them African American, to be the computers that would carry out the calculations, utilizing advanced mathematics required to make these kinds of calculations. And so Hidden Figures references the fact that these people who carried out this work, and the movie focuses on 4 or 5 of them, were hidden from view in the sense that most Americans didn't know this aspect of our own history. But also, of course, the figures is the figures that they were calculating. John Glenn personally made the point that he wanted these ladies to calculate his trajectory to confirm that it was accurate, because he didn't trust the computers, he trusted them. So that's a little bit of a sense of the book and the movie, but this has tapped something very deep in terms of, I think, the American psyche, in terms of a better, not only a better day in the sense of the past, but a better day that can come again. And so I want to just use that as a kind of jumping off point to some of the developments quickly here. First of all, collaboration internationally on terrorism. You had the meeting, really a stunning development, the meeting in Turkey of the heads of the chiefs of staff of the United States, Russia, and Turkey, of Dunsforth, General Dunsforth from the United States, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Gerasimov from Russia, Akar from Turkey, on now they're using this phrase apparently, enhanced deconfliction. But the point is an ongoing deepening collaboration, including obviously involving the Syrian government in the war against terrorism, against ISIS and al-Nusra. This Dunsforth tried for years to meet with Gerasimov. It could not occur under the Obama administration. Now he's met with him twice, if not 3 times, in the course of just a matter of months. Now, alongside of this, again, this coming week, the 14th and 15th, in Astana, in Kazakhstan, you have a meeting of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And this is on the ongoing ceasefire process being carried forward in Syria itself, which, of course, the ceasefire does not protect ISIS or al-Nusra. But nonetheless, this coalition effort being led by Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And we had this last week. I mean, almost all roads went to Moscow last week. The country that Obama attempted to tell the world was verboten, was essentially cast out of the international community. You had Netanyahu there. You had Sigmar Gabriel from Germany, the foreign minister of Germany. You had Erdogan and virtually his entire cabinet from Turkey in Moscow, all for high-level meetings on economics, on strategic coordination, and so forth. So this is all occurring. Also, the Syrian army has now reached the Euphrates in the eastern part of Syria, taking at least a 12-kilometer area. So you have the continuing advance of the Syrian army in coordination with with Russia, Russian air power, but also with increasing coordination with the United States. So these are major important developments. Sigmar Gabriel, I mentioned, the foreign minister, returned to Germany after his meetings with Lavrov, and I believe also Putin in Moscow. And he had the following to say, which is quite unusual coming from Europe at this point, which has been driven into hysteria by, among other things, this manipulation of sewage as intelligence into anti-Russian hysteria. He said, this is Sigmar Gabriel, foreign minister of Germany, we will not be able to achieve anything in Syria or Libya without cooperation of Russia. It was unwise on the part of the previous US president to declare Russia to be a mere regional power in public. Obviously, Russia proved that wrong. So again, an indication of the kind of shift going on, recognition of reality and public expression of a new reality that has to be taken into account. This is the center of the center of dynamics going on now in much of the world, pivoting around Eurasia and the new Silk Road. Finally, I wanted to mention, in terms of these international developments, South Korea. Park Geun-hye, the president, has been removed from power, as many of you know. The Supreme Court in South Korea upheld the impeachment. She's now removed. Now, this is very important. South Korea was manipulated by the United States and others into a strident anti-negotiation stance vis-a-vis North Korea, which only fueled a growing conflict, and also was being manipulated against China and Russia in a broader sense. What now is most likely to come forward, the reports that we have, Mike Pellington again went through some of this last night, is that the opposition parties, which out of them will become, in all likelihood, the next president within a matter of weeks, will be opposed to the placement of the THAAD missile systems in South Korea, and will be, as is being admitted in the U.S. press, would rather move rapidly again towards negotiations directly with North Korea and finding avenues of cooperation again with North Korea, which had been originally violently disrupted during the Bush administration and carried forward under the Obama administration. We can get back on track, whether it's 4 powers, 5 powers, or whatever in the region, with this shift going on. So again, I mean, if you look at this as a kind of unbroken process, really starting in December of 2015, you could say, with the formation of the AIIB, when the AIIB went into force. I mean, it's in terms of a dynamic, radical shift in the world. Through the Brexit process in June of 2016, the Italian referendum, the November election of Trump, you're seeing this rapid transformation of the world. And now the removal of the president of South Korea, who had become a mere puppet for the neocons. So, this is profound and dramatic. So moving quickly then, looking at the United States quickly here, the economic breakdown is continuing. And it's as Mike Steagall was emphasizing from the policy committee, that breakdown is moving closer. And that is being talked about, signaled, discussed in various ways again in the financial press, partly from the standpoint of saying to Trump, unless you play ball with us, this is going to be hung around your neck, this economic collapse. But nonetheless, that collapse is ongoing. Now, so it's all the more important that we just released, and this is available on the LaRouche PAC website, the new digital pamphlet, LaRouche's 4 Laws, America's Future on the Silk Road. That's now released. It'll be expanded upon. What's there digitally takes in the chapters, but a lot more material is going to be added, and it will eventually be out in print. But that is now available free on the LaRouche PAC website. So definitely take advantage of that. We have an April conference in New York City titled "Why the U.S. Must Join the Silk Road," and we'll be planning more watershed events. In the context, the first of LaRouche's 4 laws is the reenactment of Glass-Steagall, as you know, and the House of Representatives has HB 790. That's the Marcy Kaptur bill to reenact Glass-Steagall. We have 6 more sponsors, Democrats on that. That brings it to 37.
37 co-sponsors, 38.
37 co-sponsors, in addition to Congressman Captor of Ohio's sponsorship. We also had this last week, we had again an intervention. It was by Newsmax at the White House press briefing. John Gizzi of Newsmax questioned Sean Spicer, the White House spokesman, on support for Glass-Steagall. And without going through the transcript, Spicer agreed that a meeting between Trump and Bernie Sanders certainly was possible, and when appropriate would occur, that the president was reaching across the aisle. And when Gizzi specified, "Are you still committed to restoring Glass-Steagall?" Spicer said yes on behalf of the president. Yes. So we have a dynamic in the United States, a break in the witch hunt, in the coup attempt, thanks in good part to our efforts, and now the efforts of a growing number of congressmen and senators. I haven't mentioned them all, but who are taking this in hand. And secondly, we have the drive for Glass-Steagall. We have the expanded drive for the 4 laws of LaRouche. That is Glass-Steagall, national banking, national credit, and the science driver of a crash fusion program, space program. So, that's how we're moving forward. I mean, there's other elements. Of course, Scott Pruitt, the new head of the EPA, came out and said he does not believe CO2 is the cause of climate change, which has caused a complete disruption. Again, outpouring of foot stamping and whatnot from the media. President Trump talked with President Abbas of the Palestinians and has invited him to the White House. Again, a very important break. And the report card of the American Society of Civil Engineers is out, emphasizing that $4.6 trillion is required simply to repair American existing infrastructure. As Jason emphasized last night, the proposed $1 trillion of Trump's initial proposal, doesn't cut it at all. 4.6 trillion is the kind of figures we're talking about just to repair. And in terms of a natural recovery plan, you've got to go to the 4 laws. So let me end there. I want to just close with that. You may have heard something. This got some coverage outside of ourselves and outside of a handful of sane media outlets. But the Foreign Minister Lavrov this last week again made a statement. Putin, well, I'll reference Putin in a second as well. But Lavrov said that we're now entering a post-Western Europe era. And I want to just, in that regard, bring up a statement of Russian President Vladimir Putin that he made back in 2013, roughly 3.5 years ago, at the Valdai Discussion Club, Valdai Forum. This is just a short quote. And I think this speaks to some of what we're seeing in terms of this dramatic shift or what's impelling it. He said that without the moral values that are rooted in Christianity and other world religions, without rules and moral values which have formed and been developing over millennia, people will inevitably lose their human dignity. And Russia thinks it is right and natural to defend and preserve these moral values. I just wanted to close with that because the discussion we're now going to have, led by Keisha Rogers, very much addresses this issue of value and whether you're speaking to the dynamic of the around hidden figures and the response of the American people, you see the desire to find again a kind of moral compass. But that moral compass requires also a science. And that's what LaRouche's 4 laws and his economic work over decades has centered on. So let me close there and introduce Keisha Rogers. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Brian. Give me a second here. So, hello everyone. As Brian said, the discussion topic for today is going to be what is economic value and how do you measure economic value in a society and in an economy. And I like to do something different to start the discussion. First, I'd like to start the discussion today by reciting a poem from Paul Laurence Dunbar titled Prometheus. Prometheus stole from heaven the sacred fire and swept to earth with it o'er land and sea. He lit the vessel flames of poesy, content for this to brave celestial ire. Wroth were the gods, and with eternal hate pursued the fearless one who ravished heaven, that earth might hold and feed the perfect leaven to lift men's souls above their low estates. But judge you now, when poets wield the pen, think you not well the wrong has been repaired? 'Twas all in vain that ill Prometheus fared. The fire has been returned to heaven again. We have no singers like the ones whose note gave challenge to the noblest warbler's song. We have no voice so mellow, sweet, and strong as that which shook from Shelley's golden throat. The measure of our songs is our desires. We tinkle where old poets used to storm. We lack their substance, though we keep their form. We strum our banjos and call them liars. Now, I wanted to start with that poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar. If you caught the title of the poem, it's called Prometheus. And for those who don't know who Prometheus is known as the god of fire, who actually challenged Zeus and took from Zeus the principles of creativity and gave them to mankind, because Zeus thought that mankind should not have access to knowledge. And the access to knowledge that Prometheus understood was absolutely essential for the advancements of mankind. And he gave mankind access to all kinds of knowledge: the knowledge of fire, the knowledge of poetry, the knowledge of art, the knowledge of science. It wasn't just one particular knowledge. And if you use that conception of what we're facing today, that really economic value has to be defined by, once again, it is our prerogative and it is our responsibility as a species, as mankind, to restore that fire which Prometheus once gave mankind. And I thought it's interesting in the poem that Dunbar writes, the fire has been returned to heaven again. Because what happened to a society that actually rejects the idea of the creative nature and powers of mankind, that is a society that is doomed to fail out of existence. And if you want to talk about real economic value, it is, show me the first slide. Okay. Economic value is that we really have to look at the idea that the labor force and what is absolutely essential for recognizing the development of your society has to start with one, making sure that your society is productive and creative. And what we've seen over the past several decades now is that you have a society that is decreasing in its productivity in society, that the numbers of people entering into the productive workforce right now has continued to dwindle. And it's become more and more in a downward trend, especially for the past 2 decades now. And give me 1 second.
Thanks.
And this is what we have to look at right now when we talk about the question of economic value in society. The next slide. Because when you have your society, as we are seeing today, where under the past, particularly the last administration, past 8 years, has been the increase in the death toll in the population has skyrocketed due to drug abuses, the increases in heroin epidemics, the increases in the use of drugs and the use of so-called over-the-counter prescription drugs, opioids, that now the numbers of people who have been increased in the taking of opioids, prescription drugs, painkillers, have actually led to an increase in the spike of suicides in the society. You've also had an increase in the amount of heroin use, drug abuses. And if you look at the fact that just recently, the newly elected President Trump has made it one of his #1 prerogatives that this drug epidemic that has devastated our society has to be eliminated immediately. And by doing this, it means that one, we actually have to stop the drug cartels, stop the infestation and infiltration of these drugs into our society. Because when you talk about economic value in society, how are you going to actually have a society which is productive and actually have a labor force where this labor force can increase the measure of value in productivity in society if most of your population is being killed off by drugs? Most of your population is being driven to suicide. So now, this is where we get to Mr. LaRouche's conception of economic value as defined in his 4 laws, and really what we have to think about as the responsibility of mankind today, defined in the poem as expressed by Paul Laurence Dunbar of Prometheus. Because economic value is just not, how much money you're throwing around in society. It's not just that you go to the financial aggregates.
Oh, there you go. There we go.
And it's not that you have an increase in your society of the amount of money and financial aggregates that you're pumping out, the bailouts to bail out the Wall Street financial interests. This is not a representation of economic value. As a matter of fact, I found it funny when Brian was making the mention of the representative for President Trump, the press secretary for President Trump, reiterated President Trump's support for Steagall. And all of a sudden, it was shown in Bloomberg News and various news how just within a matter of minutes after after it was announced that President Trump actually still held to his support of Glass-Steagall, that the market started to go down and they started to waver in all different directions. And you're thinking like, well, what does someone saying that the president supports Glass-Steagall, something that hasn't even been actually confirmed and brought into existence, have to do with the market's ups and downs? And you can say, well, maybe that was just coincidence and doesn't really have something to do with it. But my point is that when you have a society, when you actually base the conception of value in society on the markets, on something that actually has no intrinsic or physical value whatsoever, and people put their lives, they stake their lives in this stuff. They, I have to invest, I have to be in the markets rule everything. The little green men under the floorboards will tell you whether or not you're going to be rich or not richer. And what does that, it's so insane. What does that really mean? And so this is what we're going to really try to get at today, is a principle of economic value, as Mr. LaRouche has come to understand. And Lyndon LaRouche, people must understand, is the most accurate long-term economic forecaster, and his economic forecasting has been, bar none, the most correct from the standpoint of looking at economics against what the so-called economists of the university systems today and economists within the Wall Street apparatus have deemed economics. And if we're really going to actually get people to come to understand the required measures and understanding needed to recognize the fundamental principles in Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws, you have to really start from the basis of the science of physical economy and the scientific method that LaRouche has taken up. And this is the 6th class here. So we've been going through a series of these classes.
She wanted to make it a little clearer.
Oh, it's not
going
going
to
to
be that clear.
it's not-
It's just
no,
too small.
It's not going to be that clear. It's too small. Yeah, the basic point is on the increases of how much over the course of, this was done in 1995, and it has just spiraled out of control in terms of the fake money printing that we've seen in our society. Versus, you look at the bottom line there, where the graph is going in a downward, the economic output of society, the real physical economic output. What is that? What is physical economy? Today, when you think of physical economy and you ask the population, how is agriculture actually organized? How is food produced? Or where do people get their food from?
Grocery store.
Yeah, it grows on the grocery store shelf. Exactly. And actually, that's what a lot of the generations, millennia or others today believe. Because when you go into an economic class in the education system or higher education, you learn economics 101 so all you do is you have to figure out what the markets are telling you is valuable at that time. Now, as Brian situated the four laws, which again are of Lyndon LaRouche, and LaRouche initiated these 4 laws in 2014 and called it the 4 laws to save the United States, the USA today, not an option, but an immediate necessity. And since he has initiated those 4 laws, they are now more of an immediate necessity than ever before, because with the breakdown of the economy under the past 2 administrations, and more emphatically as stated under the Obama administration, with the shutdown and the dismantling of sections of our manned space program, and the move toward continuation of increasing and protecting Wall Street and these fraudulent financial aggregates while shutting down the real economy. This is what we've had to deal with for the past 8 years, and for the past 16 years, while we've increased these financial aggregates to put more money into unnecessary wars, and as said, bailing out the Wall Street speculators. Now, that's been the policy in the United States for far too long, and that policy has been a representation of the rejection of the creative powers of mankind, which is a true expression of economic value in your society. If you don't have a society which is actually organizing the people of its nation to be more productive and creative in terms of the idea that there's an understanding of a distinction, as Mr. LaRouche has understood, from the difference between man and animal. And we have to really get at that fundamental question as the basis of what is economic value in society. And I'm going to take this very beautiful conception again from Mr. LaRouche in his 4 Laws paper that has been read and discussed on a number of occasions, but I think it cannot be overstated. So, as said, the fourth of Mr. LaRouche's 4 Laws is the overarching principle of the conception of economic value from the standpoint of a science driver mission orientation in society. That economic value starts with the idea of the discovery of mankind to know universal physical principles and to be able to apply those principles and to make discoveries that are going to contribute to generations to come. And the idea that there is a order of truth within the universe is what you actually have to come to understand, that society, the basis of society has to start with the way you come to understand knowledge and to apply that knowledge within your society is through the creative powers of the human mind. Someone had to make a breakthrough in the discoveries of certain principles of how the universe is organized, how space is organized, that space is not chaotic, space is not linear. And we've been discussing this a bit over the course of the last few classes, where you take some simple concepts about the ordering of space, that when you have an idea of, well, I'll come back to that in a second, because I want to show you something, but I'm going to actually take from Mr. LaRouche's conception of this. And says in his 4 laws, this is the 4th of his 4 laws. And think about this, because we're going to kind of slow it down a bit and let you work through it, and we'll work through it together. Adopt a fusion driver crash program. The essential distinction of man from all lower forms of life, hence, in practice, is that it presents the means for the perfection of the specifically affirmative aims and needs of human individual and social life. Therefore, the subject of man in the process of creation as an affirmative identification of an affirmative statement of an absolute state of nature is a permitted form of expression. Principles of nature are either only of affirmation or they could not be affirmatively stated among civilized human minds. So, the subject of man in the process of creation is that unlike any other animal, mankind has access to knowledge. The human mind allows for us to actually know that principle of creation, that we have a responsibility to continue the process of creation. It also gives us the understanding that mankind has access to principles of knowledge within the universe that show us that the increase in the productivity of society is based on the increase in the measures that we can, as we make new discoveries and new breakthroughs, we transmit those discoveries and those ideas on and on to the next generations and to future generations to come. So the discoveries that were made by Einstein, by Kepler, are discoveries that we today are continuing to be affected by and continuing to come to understand ourselves. And then those same discoveries in musical composition or scientific composition will live on and will continue to help to develop the next generations of leaders. And this is what Linda LaRouche says is the principle of economic value, to increase the potential in your society, because economic value is how do you increase the potential for growth in society. And it starts with the idea of the creation and assimilation and transmission and the realization of the scientific principles and related discoveries whose practice represents the potential economy of labor. So now let's take an example of that. Let's look at the Da Vinci paintings here, articles. Okay, so first of all, to recognize how do you actually organize a society around the most advanced and productive measures of society in order to create new machinery, new designs, new machine tool principles that's actually going to help your society to be able to work more efficiently, and at the same time organize the society to the principles in economics from the standpoint of how you create new advancements in your economy through new designs of machinery, new designs of organizing your workforce to be organized in a way that is in congruence or in the same direction as the understanding that you want to be able to have your workforce to be able to work more efficiently. So one of the things that you can look at is, as said, there's principles in the ordering of our universe that actually gets to the idea of that there is similar spherical action, which is ordered throughout the universe. So the idea that if you want to figure out how to make your workforce, human beings, not be able to work more forcefully, meaning that they are not wearing themselves out through the work that they're doing, then you actually have to figure out how to make your machines and to make the ability for them to work more efficiently organized by, well, how is the human body organized? And this is just a schematic from the great artist Leonardo da Vinci, and it is a man who what he's actually demonstrating is that throughout life, throughout the universe, life throughout the universe is actually ordered in a way which corresponds to a principle of circular and spherical self-similar growth. And if you want to actually go to the next one, he takes that same conception, and if you want to look at the principle of least action, which was developed by Leibniz, and the principles of the design of machine tool, the heat-powered machine, the increases in the machinery of society that took human beings from actually having to do exerted manual labor in society, where we would actually have horse and carriage or a oxen, just a pulley, or excuse me, ox, and the way that we would organize our agriculture or that we would till our land was very harsh on the human body. And then you actually had the discovery that was made by people like Leibniz and others who started to look at this principle of, well, wait a minute, what is it that is, how is the human body actually organized? What is it that's going to actually allow us to work more efficiently? If we develop new principles of machine tool design that, one, not only allow for the human mind to be able to free the body from having to do so much exerted manual labor, as today we're seeing that we're able to more efficiently and effectively till our land than we were several hundred years ago. So if we can, then what does that do to the increase in your society to be able to now do absolutely more productive things in a society where we can increase the amount of work that's being done. But the amount of work that's being done is not going to be an increase in physical work, but it's going to be an increase in the creative and mental work. Because now you're talking about the assimilation of new ideas and new principles in society that actually allows for the society to be more creative and to bring in new principles that can be applied and assimilated into the population and into society that increases the economic value of society. And just think about that for a minute, because we can look at that from the standpoint of our space program, because what we're discussing here is the defiance of the idea of a limitation to growth in a society, because that's what you're dealing with right now. That there are certain measures and people who believe that there are limits to growth in society, that mankind cannot actually create something new, something that has never existed before, which is absolutely untrue. The idea of the creative powers of mankind is that we don't live in a fixed universe that says that human beings are subject to the domain, the land, and society in which they live. You know, this is what LaRouche talks about in terms of the principle of an increase in population density, or increase in the relative population density of your society. Meaning you have a certain square mileage of land area, and you have so much resources already afforded to you on that land, and that can actually sustain a certain level of population. Now, if human beings were only animals, and say we were only like the beavers, or that, well, even the beavers are kind of smart because they can, they have some access to being able to go and gather up their sticks and gather up, you know, but they have to find those sticks right there in the area in which they live. You know, they can't go to space and get it or something. But the idea is that human beings have the ability to change the environment in which they live. And they have the ability to actually create new environments that never existed before. So when people tell you there's too many people on the planet, or that we can only sustain a certain amount of life on the planet, then they're completely wrong. And these are people who believe in a limitation to growth, or in essence, believe in population reduction. The idea that human beings have no real value outside of just being another animal, which the basis of LaRouche's economics shows you absolutely different, that the power of the creative powers of mankind to bring new advancements of technologies, new sciences into practice, but which are applicable based on the idea that there is a ordering and an affirmative knowledge that can be known and applied in the universe. And once you get that conception, once you know that, one, that the principle of least action in society can be applied to all forms of scientific discovery, to be applied to all forms of an increasing in your knowing of how society is ordered on and off the planet. And that will allow you to make new breakthroughs in the types of instrumentation, or the types of machine tool design, the idea of how your workforce is organized, how your society is organized, because now you will recognize that there's no limitation to the growth in the process of, you know, of what the idea, well, I'll say the idea that you have a difference between an entropic growth in society, meaning, as I said, the idea that there's a limitation on what mankind can actually do, or how far mankind can progress. But when you look at what we've done in terms of the breakthroughs in atomic physics, in nuclear sciences, we have gone beyond all limitations that have been put on mankind. Go to so this one, yeah. So the idea that if we look at this idea of increasing the economy of a society, you always have to be looking at upward trends of growth and increasing in the changes in behavior of your society is based on new discoveries that are made to increase the knowledge and productive base of society. So what we have here is, this is a chart on energy growth and density. And you look at one, we've gone from a lower state of energy in society, a lower state of energy density from wood burning in society. And you look at, okay, well, you have a wood burning society, how much of a population, productive population can you sustain with that? Versus you increase to coal, to oil and gas, but eventually you would actually have to increase to more higher states of energy density, which would allow for complete explosion in the potential increases in population density in your society, which is increase in fusion energy. But you look at this from the standpoint that we're not, as you increase your energy density in society, but we're not just talking about this from the standpoint of Earth, but now you start to see how you can use, one, the burning of natural gases to get us to other planetary bodies is very much less efficient than a fission or fusion source of getting us to other planetary bodies. Let me just ask people, people have heard about the Saturn V rocket. You know what the Saturn V rocket did?
Got us to the moon.
Got us to the moon. Okay, so do you know how many pounds that rocket is?
Tons.
Yeah, it's about 500 million pounds.
Six
6 million.
6 million? I'm talking about the fuel sources here.
I think 95% of them is a fuel source.
Yeah. Let me just make sure I got the right. So the rocket itself weighs, yes, 6 million pounds, and you have 3 stages of the rocket, which the first 2 stages burnt chemical fuel, and then the third stage to provide the third stage access to get into orbit. And the third stage, once it gets into orbit, accelerates at a certain velocity to get to the destination, the moon. Now, the point is that if most of that, if you go to NASA, and I would encourage people to do this, and you go and actually see the Saturn V rocket, which is still lying on its side. It's a giant warehouse where the whole rocket is placed inside, being preserved. It was outside getting warped, and then they redid it. You'll see that the first 2 giant stages of the rocket are really nothing but fuel. The first 2 stages are the fuel boosters that's needed to get you up to get you into space. But it doesn't, but it weighs so much. Now, if you actually had a nuclear rocket, which would allow for, one, you to be able to increase that the propellant weight would be traded off for the increase in the payload weight. So meaning that we could get more materials into space on a nuclear rocket. So you would be able to actually transport more supplies that you would need to get onto the moon or Mars eventually, but let's stick with the moon first because that's our closest planetary body. And then if you wanted to actually shuttle more supplies to actually build a permanent colony on the moon, which a lot of people are talking about right now. If people don't know this, that there's a big discussion right now that we actually have to not just go back to the moon and put our footprints on the moon, but the basis of the moon is absolutely essential for the continued progress of mankind on the earth, because as we start to use the resources and investigate our sister planet, the moon, then we would be able to actually come to understand or to organize the resources on the moon to better organize the resources on our own planet. For instance, the development of helium-3 on the moon. There's a resource called helium-3, which is abundant throughout the surface of the moon. And now, if we were using chemical fuel rockets, which are really obsolete right now, to continue to shuttle back and forth to the moon, first of all, because if you're going to develop the moon from the standpoint of having a more permanent presence and not just going there for a few hours to step on it and run around, then you would actually have to say, okay, we're going to have to, first of all, develop low Earth orbit. We're going to have to develop cislunar space, the space between the Earth and the moon, and distance out from the moon, so that we can actually start to develop systems which would allow us to take supplies and resources to the moon. Now, if you have nuclear rockets and then advanced fusion-powered rockets, really, then you have more weight that's going to be shifted to your payloads, so you can actually put your payloads in space and your supplies into lunar orbit and onto the surface of the moon more directly than you would be able to by just having most of the process of your spacecraft being taken up by fuel.
Economy of labor.
Yes, as economy of labor, and because it is the question of how do you actually increase the economy of labor by making it more efficient in your society, and that's what. So, and that's what was understood by the great German American engineer and Kraft Erica, who said that, quote, "Space opens new horizons beyond Earth and offers new beginnings in ways we can manage this precious planet. It offers noble aspirations, opportunities for creative action, for bringing the human family closer together and contributing to a better future for all." And if you go to the Kraft Erica nuclear, yeah, there you go. What this is a design by the German scientist and space pioneer, Kraft Erica, whose actual 100th birthday celebration is coming up on March 24th, this month, the middle of this month. And Kraft Erica, this is a drawing by Erica of a nuclear freighter. This was actually what was organized, a conceptual idea that Kraft Erica had for, which hasn't actually been developed, but he really had a creative imagination. Because what this would do is that this would actually carry massive payloads of supplies to the moon and into space, to the moon for advancing a permanent colony on the moon. And he actually had a very vivid imagination of something that hadn't even been brought into existence yet. And go to the next one.
Do you know what year he did that?
50, make sure. No, I wasn't 55, I think that was 66. But I have to get back to you.
Around the time maybe of Kennedy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought I had it right there. I don't. So this is Kraft Erica's conception of a society on the moon. He calls Selenopolis, and it's a conception for a permanent colony on the moon. And it's funny because, like I said, we're talking about this today. You have China right now who has made a commitment to what they're already going to investigate that which has never been investigated before by make a landing on the far side, a lunar landing on the far side of the moon. You know, but for the most part, all we've done is actually done an orbiting and around the moon, but nobody has actually gone for a landing on the moon. So this is a total
on the far side.
Far side of the moon. This is a total breakthrough. But one thing that is, you know, you think about is missing from our society today is that you don't have imagination in the society anymore. You know, that is a real basis of, if you're going to create and think about how to create the future, you actually have to live in the future, and you have to be of the future. And that's really what we're talking about here in terms of the basis of organizing a society, organizing real intrinsic value in your society, is that you promote the creative imagination of your society. When we were talking about this this book, Hidden Figures, and just what it really represented, the idea that that these individuals were contributing to something that they didn't even know was going to have such a powerful effect on the generations to come, or on their own generation and on the generations to come. But now, when we look at our society today, you know, it is the fact that people can be re-inspired. They can be re-inspired by something which is beautiful. And you think about, with all of the destruction that's going on in society today, with all of the move toward ugliness, the lies in the media, that something like this would come out, the Hidden Figures movie and the Hidden Figures book, that about women who had to go through, African American women who had to go through such a challenge. You know, they weren't, when you look at Katherine Johnson, she was not somebody who just had it easy and can go in there and do her math figures and make her scientific scientific calculations and nothing to it. But no, this was a period where you had the civil rights movement going on. This was a period you had discrimination, but it was a lot going on in society. But what they realized is that if you were going to actually take that on, you had to give people access to knowing that no matter what was done to you, what was taken away from you, or the challenges that were presented to you, your mind and the creativity of your mind, no one could take that away from you. And that's what we actually have in society, as the basis for all human beings, that you can recognize. I mean, this wasn't just 4 women who made these breakthroughs. And like I said, we never would have gotten to the moon. Well, I can't say never would have, I wasn't there. But I will say that there could have been a possibility that John Glenn wouldn't have made that first orbit around the Earth if he said, I don't really care about what this machine and computer is telling me. I want to know what the human mind, where he asked Katherine Johnson to make sure that the calculations that she had from her own mind were more accurate, or as accurate as the machine that had done the calculations, because there was concern as to whether or not the orbital trajectory of the calculations of the machine were actually accurate or not. So he said, and he didn't care whether or not she was a African American female, and society was saying that you can't be trusting an African American female, you might as well trust a machine. This was a human being, and he trusted her mind. And so that's what we have to reinstill in society again today, that we have to recommit ourselves to the development, as we're seeing with the collaboration that's now coming forth with China, with Russia, with India, the potential of the United States to join in the development of the New Silk Road, the idea that we're going to alleviate poverty in society, that we're going to actually increase the creative potential of every single human being in society. That's what China's committed to. That's what LaRouche's 4 laws really signifies. It's not just about, that we want to get a change in the current system, but we want to actually increase or to create a new conception of the understanding of economic value. And it really goes back to this principle of Prometheus again, that we have to actually give mankind the access to fire again, the access to creative knowledge. And when you say that we really want to give mankind access to something that they have never really even thought of or imagined before, what this schematic from Kraft Erica, the nuclear scientist, space pioneer, who came over, after World War II from Germany, is an expression of where mankind can go. One, that there's no limits to growth. And as he expressed, we don't live in a closed world system where people are confined to one small planet. We live in an open world system, that we don't have a limitation on the resources available to mankind, but we can create new resources. We can create new energies. And, this goes completely against the green environmentalist limits to growth agenda, that mankind can live both on and off the planet in harmony with each other. And so this is what we have to look forward to, because if we're going to increase our knowledge of what it is to what constitutes and what is the measure, should we say, of value in society, you have to think not based on your surrounding capabilities, but based on what you actually have the capability of creating or of bringing into existence, and recognizing that that which has not yet been brought into existence, you now, the power of the human mind can bring that into existence by understanding understanding that it is creation and creativity which measures value in society, not money, and not just bailouts and economic things that have no intrinsic value whatsoever. So I'm gonna leave it at that. And you got a question?
Could you please repeat that poem which you started with?
Okay.
Need a Kleenex?
They're right here.
Oh,
I
okay.
got
Thank you.
Prometheus stole from heaven the sacred fire and swept to earth with it o'er land and sea. He lit the vessel flame. Sorry. I'm gonna start that over because I got caught in his throat there. Prometheus stole from heaven the sacred fire and swept to earth with it o'er land and sea. He lit the vessel flames of poesy, content for this to brave celestial ire. Wroth were the gods, and with eternal hate pursued the fearless one who ravished heaven, that earth might hold in fee the perfect leaven to lift men's souls above their low estate. But judge you now, when poets wield the pen, think you not well the wrong has been repaired? 'Twas all in vain that ill Prometheus fared. Fire has been returned to heaven again. We have no singers like the ones whose note gave challenge to the noblest warbler's songs. We have no voice so mellow, sweet, and strong as that which broke from Shelley's golden throat. The measure of our songs is our desires. We tinkle where old poets used to storm. We lack their substance, though we keep their form. We strum our banjos and call them liars. It's interesting. All right, any more questions, thoughts? The physics experts in the room.
I think on the Leonardo da Vinci diagrams, I think it's interesting to think about.
You want to pull that one up?
For sure. Yeah, and pull that up. Yeah, I mean, I guess you could start looking at some of these things like on the left, top left, I guess some kind of a screw.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in the middle a water wheel.
Mm-hmm. You see the water coming up from the bottom.
Yeah. Anyway, all kinds of gears, clearly, levies.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about, the polemics that people like Alexander Hamilton, later Friedrich List, Henry Carey, the economists in the tradition that LaRouche is in, would argue that you need manufacturing because you've got to create a society in which ultimately a machine can do the work of 100 people.
Mm-hmm.
And then soon a machine can do the work of 1,000 people. And of course, today you have robots. And Brian was showing us in one of the previous classes an incredible floor of a factory. I don't know if it was in Detroit or where, but where so much of the work is being done by the robots, right? And so the argument is, well, that's bad because that's going to take away the jobs from the people, but then you have to think about a division of labor. First of all, who's going to design these machines? Who's going to design these robots? Who's going to train the minds to learn how to design these things? So you have actually a whole new division of labor. And if your society is actually going forward, you're going to see the need of this is going to increase. And the tragedy is that what happened to us, even though we've made, incredible breakthroughs in some areas of machine tools still, and robotics, which are really, who would want to do a job in a factory, the same thing every day, for the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Wouldn't it be better that your mind was engaged in something that's exciting? Yeah, creative.
And figuring out a better way to do it.
Right.
And Lynn used to talk about, excuse me, the suggestion box.
Right.
And many of the best ideas for the engineers would come from the suggestion box that people from the floor would put in to say, this is a better way to do this. We could streamline what we're now doing. And, the mark of the failure today to do that, since, back in the 70s, we became more and more addicted to growing the financial system at the expense of the investment in the productive economy. I can just say just as an example, which people probably have no clue, they feel the effect of it. But in the medical field, for instance, I remember going back in the 80s, doctors beginning to complain about how they had a one nurse and maybe one receptionist office. And then, by the late 80s, you had the over 50% of the office was clerical staff to manage insurance.
Yeah.
Because insurance was finding new ways. And this is an insurance system that was introduced by Nixon, who created the idea of managed care. The idea that insurance companies could define what the doctor could or could not do for you, what they would pay for to reduce cost. And by lulling the population, the idea that your costs are going to be reduced, what they did is they created a system, and this of course had to be after 71 and that period, with the end of the Bretton Woods system, that you had the growth of the insurance industry into something that today has absolutely destroyed, the medical system. And we're just seeing the beginning of it.
Really?
People are
the beginning of it.
the beginning of it.
End of it, aren't we?
Yeah. I'm just saying, if we don't get Glass-Steagall,
Right.
we get a completely different system. Which, the thing that's very clear, for instance, in Texas, is that people were lulled into going. In Texas, the medical practitioners, hospitals, doctors, and so forth, were lulled into going along with the effects of the Obamacare system and the lack of Medicaid expansion by the state giving grants to the institutions and the providers to care for those that otherwise would be part of that Medicaid expansion, right? And now they're just slicing the budget, right? They're laying off thousands. In the hospital system, MD Anderson's laid off 5,000.
Like doctors and nurses?
Oh yeah, practitioners, administrative people, and the same is happening. In the UT system. So, until you get rid of that, until you get Glass-Steagall through, until you cut off the head of this financial cancer. Mm-hmm. That is controlling everything, just looting the doctors, looting the providers, looting the hospitals, looting all the workers. And it's a huge, I'm part of a huge bureaucracy that exists only to process the insurance apparatus, right, to keep that thing going.
And what's on the cover? What
Hidden Figures.
The ladies. Yeah, it's the calculators, just the, yeah, the
Hold it
figures,
up. Oh, yeah, the picture.
the group picture, yeah.
But that's an example of a new platform. If you think about it, in 1903, Wright brothers developed powered flight. So before that, there was no such thing as an aeronautical engineer or aeronautical science.
Mm-hmm.
And within 14 years, they created this advisory commission on aeronautics.
Right.
And then within 30 years, you had this explosion, this powered flight to supersonic flight. And then a mere 10 years after that, you had rocketry.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
All that didn't even exist before 1903.
Yeah, that is an expression of a real
Platform.
new platform.
Yep.
Yep.
It's also a version of the triple curve, which shows what happened afterwards, where we went down, in that direction.
Yeah, because when we actually took away the direction toward fusion, fusion resources, then
If you think about it, from the mid-60s
right.
till now, we haven't improved.
No.
They're paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to low Earth, not even orbit, but to go suborbital, which is what we did 50 years ago.
Right, and some of the advancements we were doing with the in 1959 is when we were starting to do the first testings of nuclear rocket engines, and I mean we made certain strides and certain breakthroughs there, but then really after the early 1970s, that was when you start to see a tapering off of those types of breakthroughs. You had the, in the 1950s, 1959s, you had the NERVA projects, the nuclear engine for rockets, rocket vehicle application project. And they were starting to look at this process of how nuclear powered engines would actually be organized to get to our aircraft, for our aircraft to get to and from lunar orbit, low Earth orbit. And then obviously they were thinking about this. They were already thinking about this from the standpoint of permanent colonies and what you would actually need to actually have a rapid acceleration of your spacecraft too. Because they were also looking at it from the standpoint of not just the moon, but also of Mars, that if you're going to actually get spacecraft to Mars, you can't use these chemical rockets. It's not going to work. So you think about that, that was 1959. And so, yeah, we've gone backwards, backwards in our platforms.
Get to lower orbit without
Yeah, we can't
help
get,
from North Korea.
we can't get to low Earth orbit right now. I mean, sorry, without help from the Russians. We can't get to the space station, rather. And then you have crazy Congress members who are saying, well, you know, they're saying that, which is right, that one, the United States needs to be able to develop its own spacecraft that's going to get us into the International Space Station and into low Earth orbit before next year. And it's really unrealistic because, you know, first of all, talking about the backwardness that, one, we cut our fusion programs. They've cut the research programs at MIT, at Princeton. We really don't have much of a fusion research program going on right now. If we don't have unless we're just going to have Blue Origin and SpaceX take us into space. And right now, people know about that. That they have SpaceX talking about they're gonna have put human beings on the moon now.
Well,
So
orbit, just orbit.
Orbit the moon, yeah.
orbit the moon.
But how many of their launches have failed?
How many of their, yeah. Well, there's a lot of them.
I think it's useful to also think about the enormous potential that exists. If you look at the Leonardo da Vinci drawings up there, sketches, on the left, those screws are actually Archimedean screws for lifting water.
Ah,
That's what they are. You know, you see at the bottom, they're actually
Yeah, the water.
underwater.
ah,
And they're lift, by rotating them, you can lift water up. But for besides water power, though, like with the water wheels over, I mean, he was very intent on developing a modern textile industry based on water power. But a lot of his designs, a lot of his work with circular action and spiral action, if you will, in terms of simple concepts, were not realizable. For example, a well-known example is his design of a helicopter. He didn't have a power source. That's the point I wanted to make. He was designing for the future. He was thinking in terms of the future. He did not yet have the power source needed to drive these machines. So there's an interesting parallel. That's not negatively speaking, but if you think today in terms of the pent-up potential, if we develop the new levels of energy flux density, including the power, including nuclear powered rockets of advanced, taking off from the NERVA designs from the 1950s and 60s, and go on to fusion power, we have a pent-up potential in terms of the designs of Craft Erica, in terms of the knowledge that has been gained, and the advances in instrumentation and so forth, so that we could rapidly leapfrog to a new platform. Not simply utilizing something all new, but utilizing what right now is already there in the potential.
Yeah, that's,
But we should be able to produce rockets, right?
we should be able to produce our own. And we should still be able to produce our own and to get ourselves into space with the cooperation and work of cooperation and collaboration with the Russians and the Chinese. So we should actually be organizing the United States to be doing joint missions between the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans, and whoever else wants to join.
Are those heavy lift rockets that they had in China, are those like the Saturn V?
No,
they're like the Soyuz.
10% of the thrust is about 10 billion pounds. Well, not 10 million pounds, about 1 million. Where the Saturn V was 7.5 million pounds.
But what about the ratio of chemical power to what they're taking out?
It's still chemical power.
Yeah.